Welcome to our spring wonderland. Today we're creating whimsical DIYs perfect for transitioning your home from spring into summer, including vintage seed packet inspired pillows made from recycled Amazon mailers, floral cups inspired by World Market, an enchanting moss wreath, a dreamy floral chandelier, and playful bow chair backs. Before we begin creating, I want to share the inspiration behind this Wonderland theme. At Always Uttori, it's all about inspiring makers like you to create a little enchantment of your own. So, to get the inspiration flowing, here's our Spring Wonderland mood board. Like stepping into a whimsical storybook, Wonderland combines soft florals, vintage details, and fresh, vibrant colors. Inspired by English countryside romance and playful spring maximalism, the aesthetic layers botanical textures, vintage rusticity, soft lavender and hydrangea blues, and juicy fruit tones to create a setting that feels both nostalgic and enchanting. Collected decor, delicate patterns, and garden-inspired elements bring warmth and personality, resulting in a world that feels cozy, feminine, whimsical, and just a little theatrical. Now that we have our inspiration, let's start creating some spring magic. I'm starting with decorative pillows inspired by vintage seed packets. Best of all, these are completely upcycled using materials you probably already have around the house, making this a super affordable but impactful DIY. I'm using Amazon mailers to make these pillows. I found a few that were similar in size and material, then removed as many stickers and pieces of tape as I could. If you can't get everything off, that's fine, since most of it will end up covered anyway. Next, I painted the mailers using white acrylic paint mixed with a little brown to give them a softer vintage tone. I actually meant to add textile medium to help prevent shipping later on, but completely forgot. So if you try this DIY and happen to have some on hand, I'd definitely recommend testing it out. I painted the bags pretty loosely because the imperfect texture actually helps create that aged vintage look. Just make sure any logos or leftover labels are covered well. Originally, I planned to use floral images from an old calendar book to create the seed packets, but once I cut everything out, I realized the scale was way too small for the pillows. So instead, I designed my own vintage-inspired seed packets in Canva. If you'd like to use these designs I made, they'll be available as a digital download in my Etsy shop linked below. To attach the designs, we're going to decoupage them directly onto the bags. I printed mine on regular printer paper and tore the edges by hand because the rough edges blend into the background much better than sharp cut lines. For smaller details though, cutting more precisely can definitely help. Once I had everything arranged, leaving about an inch at the top for sewing later, I used Mod Podge to glue all the elements down. After everything dried, I went over the bags lightly with coffee to give them a more aged, vintage feel. This step is optional, but I think it added to the overall look. One thing to watch out for though, too much moisture can make some of the printed ink run slightly. It does kind of add to the vintage effect, but I'd recommend concentrating most of the coffee on the background areas instead of directly over the printed designs. Once that dried, I sealed everything again with another layer of Mod Podge. Now for the really interesting part. To make the mailers softer and more fabric-like, I tried a Japanese technique called momigami, which translates to kneaded paper. Traditionally, oil is worked into paper while folding and crumpling it repeatedly to break down the fibers and create a soft, flexible texture. I used canola oil since that was what I already had at home. This was my first time trying the technique, and these mailers were definitely thicker than the papers I usually see used for momigami, but I think it worked surprisingly well. I folded, crumpled, and kneaded the bags, adding a little oil to my hands whenever the paper started feeling dry. Over time, the material became much softer and more pliable. Each pillow probably took me around 10 to 20 minutes to fully knead. Some of the edges of the decoupage elements lifted slightly during the process, but those were easy to glue back down afterward. This is also where the paint chipping became more noticeable. As I kneaded the paper, tiny bits of paint started flaking off. I think adding textile medium earlier probably would have helped prevent that, so that's definitely something I'd test next time. For filling, I originally planned to reuse stuffing from old pillows, but instead I decided to experiment with shredded paper. And honestly, it worked really well. The pillows are definitely firmer this way, but since they're mainly decorative, I actually don't mind the structure. You can even fluff them a little by shaking them, similar to a regular pillow. To finish the pillows, I used a ladder stitch to sew them closed. I actually learned how to do it from a YouTube video, which I'll link below. Essentially, you make a small stitch on one side and then repeat it on the opposite side, pulling everything together as you go. You can also continue adding extra filling while sewing to make the pillow firmer. If you don't want to hand sew them, you could use glue instead. I actually tested both methods. For the glued version, I used E6000 along with Mod Podge because I wanted the pillows to hold up well with regular use and pressure. Hot glue might work too, but I'm not sure how durable it would be long term. The only downside to gluing was that I needed to use clips to hold everything together while it dried. But so far the glued pillow has held up just as well as the sewn versions. Hi, editing me here with a little pillow update. I wanted to test these out for a few weeks so I could share how they actually held up over time. The glued version did end up getting a rip along the side, and I think that might be because air couldn't escape through the top the way it can with the sewn versions, so that's definitely something to keep in mind if you want to try this project. However, the glued seam itself is actually still holding together really well. Overall, the pillows have held up well after a few weeks of use. There is a little lifting around some of the decoupaged elements, but structurally they're still in good shape. I do think these would hold up especially well as decorative pillows that aren't being handled constantly. Mine have also been sitting outside in the greenhouse, so temperature and humidity changes could also be affecting them. I love that this project can be made almost entirely from materials that would normally get thrown away, and I'm already planning more pillows I can make with this method. Next up are these floral glasses inspired by some I saw at World Market, retailing for around $10 each. Most of the versions I saw featured dried flowers suspended inside double-walled glass. And to recreate a similar look, I decided to try the same technique I used to dupe the Anthropologie seed glass floral vases, which we featured in our nature decor video, which I'll link below. This project is honestly super quick and easy. All you need are glasses, pressed flowers, and Mod Podge. I used a few glasses I already had at home and attached the flowers using Mod Podge, then sealed over the top of them. Since these are actually drinking glasses that will be used regularly, I definitely recommend using dishwasher-safe Mod Podge. I actually have some somewhere, but I couldn't find it, so I ended up using glossy Mod Podge instead. Because of that, I'll only be hand washing these. I did notice the glue become slightly tacky while washing, but once dry, everything looked completely fine again. Another thing to keep in mind is the finish you choose really changes the final look. Glossy Mod Podge creates more of a glass-like appearance, while matte gives a softer frosted effect. You can create whatever floral arrangement or pattern you want. Some of the flowers with stems needed a little extra pressure to keep them flat while drying, but overall they attached pretty easily. In my previous vase project, I covered the entire surface in glue to mimic that textured seed glass look. But since these are cups people will actually drink from, I wanted to keep most of the texture concentrated around the floral details. Unfortunately, the edges still created a little visible texture, so in the end, I decided to coat the entire bottom half of the glass to make the design feel more intentional and cohesive. I taped off the top portion of the glasses first because I didn't want any glue too close to the rim. Then I brushed Mod Podge around the lower half of the cups. The nice thing is the brush strokes actually become part of the design, so you can create swirls, waves, or soft textured lines depending on the look you want. Once everything dried, I removed the tape. A few edges peeled up slightly, so the finish wasn't perfect, but I still think they give off such a fun spring vibe. Next up is this whimsical moss wreath inspired by one I saw on Pinterest. I actually started this project last year and only just finished it now because of how many materials it took to fully cover the wreath, but honestly, I think the final result was worth it. Since I wanted a large square-shaped wreath similar to the inspiration photo, I decided to make the base out of cardboard so I could fully customize the size to fit my door. I doubled up the cardboard layers to make the structure sturdier and trimmed everything down to the dimensions I wanted using a box cutter. To create the rounded shape, I used Dollar Tree pool noodles. After measuring how thick I wanted the frame, I cut out the center of the cardboard I glued down the 2 layers of cardboard. Then I cut the pool noodles in half and attached the noodles using hot glue. Because the pool noodles naturally curve outward, there was a dip in the center, so I stuffed plastic bags in between to help round everything out and give the wreath a fuller shape overall. I also used some bags to make up for the little bit of pool noodle that I was missing. I painted everything green so that it would blend in better. Then I began attaching the moss with hot glue. And if you watched our nature decor video, you might recognize this moss because I've recycled it from one of the projects in that video. One warning though, attaching moss with hot glue can be dangerous. I burned my fingers more than once trying to press the moss down. So if you try something similar, I'd recommend using finger protectors or just a scrap piece of cardboard to press everything into place. Once the base was covered, I started layering in greenery around the edges to create a cascading effect. I added flowers along one side and tucked black and white ribbon bows throughout the arrangement. Originally, I planned to cover much more of the wreath in flowers, but because of the size, it used way more materials than I expected. Since I didn't want to buy anything new, I worked with what I already had and ended up leaning more heavily into the moss texture instead. The moss gives it an overgrown, enchanted garden feeling that I like, even though it wasn't exactly what I envisioned originally. One thing I ran into was the wreath warping slightly when I tried to hang it, so I attached a metal bracket that I already had. I pressed the screws directly into the cardboard and reinforced everything with hot glue, which ended up working surprisingly well. The cardboard had also warped a little from sitting in storage over the past year, but placing some heavy crates on top flattened it back out pretty easily. Overall, I think this project is such a fun way to bring fresh spring greenery and whimsical garden charm into your space. Next are these oversized decorative bows I'm using as chair backs. I originally saw this idea from Bargain Bethany here on YouTube, but she used hers as wall decor, and I thought they would look so fun styled on chairs for spring. To make them, I used plastic tablecloths from Dollar Tree and cut away the pattern sections I wanted to keep. Mine were Easter themed, so I removed most of the bunny designs and kept the plaid and floral portions since they felt much more spring garden inspired. Then I cut those sections down the center along the fold lines, and each tablecloth ended up making 2 bows. From there, I simply gathered and tied the plastic into oversized bow shapes, trying to keep both sides even so they would hang nicely from the chairs. Since these bows would be hanging vertically and needed a little structure to hold their shape, I added wire inside the loops. I measured each loop, cut the wire to size, and taped it inside the plastic. Then I ran another piece of wire through the center knot and into each loop to help the loop stay upright and balanced. These ended up adding such a fun, whimsical touch to the space. They feel playful and dramatic, especially paired with all the florals and greenery. Whether you're hosting for spring or just want your home to feel a little more magical, I think details like this make such a difference. Stay tuned to see how all of these projects come together as I style my greenhouse for spring. And if you've been enjoying the video so far, don't forget to give it a like. It helps others who would enjoy these DIYs find them. Okay, we've got one more project before we put everything together, a floral chandelier. I've seen versions of these floating around Pinterest for a while, and I've always wanted to create my own take on one for spring. For the base, I'm using hula hoops and 2 Dollar Tree pool noodles. If you can find green pool noodles, those would definitely blend in better with the greenery, but I was trying to use materials I already had on hand, so the only new things I purchased for this project were the hula hoops. I cut slits down the side of the pool noodles, wrapped them around the hoops, and trimmed away the excess. Then I secured the ends with tape. To start building the chandelier, I wrapped ivy greenery around the hoops and attached everything with pipe cleaners. You could also use floral wire or hot glue, but I wanted this build to be reusable so I could repurpose the flowers later. I hoped the garland would cover more of the base on its own, but it ended up being pretty sparse, so I started layering in the faux hydrangea and additional greenery to build fullness. I wanted the flowers to hang downward slightly instead of sitting flat against the form like a traditional wreath, so I focused on arranging everything so that the flowers could hang freely. I continued filling in empty areas using whatever greenery and florals I could find, especially larger hydrangea stems and leaves to help take up more space visually. One nice thing was that on the top side, I could slide stems directly into some of the pipe cleaners and wire I had already attached earlier, which made layering much easier. This project definitely used more florals than I originally expected because you're decorating the entire piece from every angle instead of just one side like a wreath. A fuller garland base would probably help reduce how many extra flowers you need overall. At a certain point, it became hard to tell how balanced everything looked while it was lying flat, so I decided to hang it up before fully finishing it. I didn't record it, but I hung the chandelier from the rafters in my greenhouse using twine. Once it was hanging, it was much easier to spot sparse areas and adjust the arrangement as I went. And with that, it's finally time to bring all of the DIYs together and create our spring wonderland. To hang the bows, I used S-hooks on the back of the chairs and added a little extra tape inside the bows to help shape them, and added tape to the chairs to keep everything hanging nicely. They actually held pretty well on their own, but this gave them a more polished and structured look. Then it was time to set the table. I used some woven placemats from TJ Maxx that I've had for a few years, silver chargers I thrifted, fun spring paper plates, and layered those with thrifted iridescent dishes, and then topped that off with floral teacup plates from a set I already owned. Finding plates that matched the exact aesthetic I wanted was a little challenging. I would have loved to use some of those trendy cabbage-style plates, but I also really enjoyed the challenge of creating the look using pieces I already had. To finish the place settings, I layered some beautiful peacock print napkins and added iridescent floral napkin rings I've had for years. Then I had a really fun surprise while cleaning the greenhouse for this setup. I found these butterfly decorations that I completely forgot I owned, and they ended up fitting the aesthetic perfectly. I tucked them into the openings of the placemats so they looked like little butterflies resting beside each place setting, and I think they added exactly the right amount of whimsy and color. Next, I placed out the floral glasses we made earlier along with some black flatware for a little contrast. I had also seen a Pinterest tablescape using small green lamps as part of the centerpiece decor, so I decided to try something similar with a lamp I already had at home. I added a few butterflies there too. I never would have thought to style a lamp on a dining table before, but it added such a fun, quirky charm while continuing that fresh green spring color throughout the space. To finish everything off, I made limeade and creme brulee topped with wild violets growing in my yard for the final touch to the spring wonderland. And our spring wonderland is complete. If you made it this far, please consider subscribing for more DIYs and decor videos like this one. Thank you so much for watching, and remember, enchantment awaits. Life is just about finding it.